co-chairs for the Seattle Community Police Commission, and welcome to today's CPC meeting. The Seattle Community Police Commission acknowledges that we are on the traditional land of the Coast Salish people, including the Muckleshoot, Squamish, Duwamish people, past and present. With humility, we recognize how much we benefit from living on their land and water. The Seattle Community Police Commission honors and esteems these tribes, and we hope that this acknowledgement will encourage authentic relationship with urban Native people and all Coast Salish people. And I will take attendance at this time. Commissioner Lars Erickson. Reverend Patricia Hunter is present. Commissioner Adrian Levitt.
Present.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Commissioner Suzette Dickerson, I do not think will be here with us today. Commissioner Lynn Wilson.
Present.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Commissioner Raven Nicole Tyler.
Good morning.
Morning. Commissioner Mary Ruffin.
She will not be here. She's out.
Okay. Commissioner Reverend Harriet Walden.
Yeah.
Good morning.
Morning.
Commissioner Joel Merkel.
Good morning, President.
Good morning. Commissioner Joseph Saya. Commissioner Lajaya Washington. Commissioner Officer Mark Mullins.
Officer Mark Mullins is present.
Good morning. Commissioner Lieutenant Tony Gatke. Good morning. Commissioner Jeremy Wood. He will be here today. Commissioner Tasha Johnson.
Good morning.
And good morning. And Commissioner Erica Newman. Good morning. We all received the draft agenda for today, July 19, 2023. Is there a motion to accept the agenda?
Make a motion that we accept today's agenda.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Seconds.
This is Tasha Johnson, and I second.
Thank you. It's been moved and seconded that we receive the agenda. Is all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? No. The agenda has been received. We also received the draft minutes. Are there any corrections to the minutes? And if not, I will receive a motion to receive the motion, receive the minutes.
I motion to receive the minutes.
Thank you. It's been moved. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Reverend Walden. It's been moved and seconded that we approve the minutes as received. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Nay. No, then the minutes are approved. Thank you so much. And now I'll turn the meeting over to my co-chair, Joel, for the discussion with Chief Diaz.
Thank you, Co-Chair Hunter, and good morning, everyone. Moving right into our agenda, we have Chief Diaz with us remotely today to answer some questions and have a conversation with us regarding the body cam video that the Seattle Times published last week that captured some disturbing images from inside the SPD East Precinct bicycle repair and break room. And as many of you know, the video showed a prominently displayed mock tombstone for a young black man, Demarius Butts, who was killed in an SPD shooting in 2017. There was also a Black Lives Matter protest sign with an apparent MAGA hat hanging from it and a Trump 2020 flag hanging from the wall. The video was dated January 2, 2021, just 4 days prior to the January 6th insurrection in our nation's capital. And at the time, the inquest proceeding into the death of Demarius Butts had already commenced. And all of these items, individually and collectively, we believe are hostile to our community and to other officers who reject this type of display. Yet this display was allowed at the time. These images have caused harm, especially to the mother of Demarius Butts. Additionally, SPD's initial response to the video was also troubling because it not only minimized the display, but it did not seem to match what we can all see in the video. Immediately after the video was published last week, the CPC co-chairs invited SPD Chief Adrian Diaz to appear at today's CPC meeting to answer some questions regarding the video and the culture at SPD that allowed this display. And Chief Diaz promptly accepted our invitation, and I want to thank him for being here today on such short notice. But before I turn it over to Chief Diaz to make a brief statement, and then for commissioners to ask questions, I want to acknowledge that one of our commissioners, Commissioner Adrian Levitt, was one of the attorneys for the Butts family in the inquest into the police shooting that led to Mr. Butts' death. And additionally, Mr. Butts' mother is here today. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Chief Diaz. Thank you for being here, Chief.
Thank you. And thank you, CPC, for allowing me to be here. I wish I was here on better circumstances. In 2021, I acknowledge the impacts that we created after George Floyd's murder. And I apologize for those impacts that we're here discussing today. It created deep mistrust, but our department is committed to making it right. And I'm committed to making it right. When I saw the images that came out of the lawsuit 2.5 years ago, these images bring back the hurt and trauma that you mentioned. I've talked with community members about this hurt, and I've talked with officers. They were embarrassed and expressed that they can't have this. It's unacceptable, and we'll work with OPA regarding the situation. While we know these items are no longer up, my focus is that we rebuild the trust. Over the last 3 years, we've lost 575 plus officers. Our personnel since that time has changed. We are changing. Immediately after settling things down, we worked to address the issues from crowd management, use of force, culture, and consent decree. And we continue to move this department forward, but change takes time. And we want to thank you and highlight some of the things that CPC and other community members have been involved with to really facilitate that culture change. The community that is engaged with our SBD for the best. We want to build that culture that focuses on building relationships within our community. We want to humanize our department. We want to humanize our community. We recently created the Relational Policing Innovation Team, reporting to the highest levels of the department, because it becomes the foundation of the department for a high level of focus and influence. In a short time, our OPA complaints have seen a drastic reduction compared to 4 years ago, and our use of force has seen a drastic reduction to 48% reduction. And up until yesterday, we had not had an officer-involved shooting involving a person in 13.5 months. And I don't recall a time that we've gone that long without an officer-involved shooting. But we have a lot of work to still do. We have a lot of change to still happen. We're working with the Officer Inspector General on an equity assessment to review bias and discrimination within our department. I have had all of our bureaus review all of their areas. And my expectation is that we make sure that we have a healthy environment, that there are no items that will be created that will create further trauma or hurt. Our expectation is that our commanders and supervisors that are the leaders that will hold their personnel accountable to this. And ultimately, they will be held accountable. Thank you for allowing me to join you today. COO Maxey is also on the line as well. I believe it's so important that we take the time to listen and understand our community's concerns. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief Diaz. We have a number of commissioners who are here. I'd like to first turn it over to Commissioner Adrian Levitt.
And thank you very much, Joel, and thank you for the introduction. And thank you, Chief Diaz, for being here today. My name is Adrian Levitt, and I'm an attorney with the Department of Public Defense, where I've worked for over 13 years. I'm also a commissioner with CPC, where I sit in the seat designated for public defense. And in my role with the Department of Public Defense, I represented the Butts family during the inquest regarding the death of their son and loved one, Demarius Butts. And I'm appreciative that you took the time today to hear from the CPC, and I'm appreciative that you're hearing from me, and I'm frankly most appreciative that you will take the time to hear from Ms. Butts, Demarius's mother, who's appearing on the WebEx and hopefully can speak after I make some remarks and ask you some questions. The Butts family was the first family that was represented by assigned counsel through the inquest process, which was an important change to the ordinance because, as you know, prior to that, families who could not afford to hire an attorney would have been unrepresented through that process. And the inquest commenced in 2019 after a long delay. Demarius Butts was killed on April 20th, 2017. And when we began the inquest proceedings in 2019, and it ended after the jury portion of the proceedings in 2022. And it was, as we've now learned, it was in the middle of those proceedings that officers with Seattle Police Department prominently displayed this tombstone in the East Precinct. And that was displayed in an open space, as we could all see the video. And it appears to be taken from a memorial to Mr. Butts and to other people killed by the police that were ongoing through the Black Lives Matter protests earlier the year before. And it's in this context that we think about how the Seattle Police Department and how officers treated a member of the community who was killed by the police. And we were able to see that through the body-worn video. And again, I think that I'm appreciative that you're taking the time to hear from us, and really most appreciative that you're taking the time to hear from Ms. Butts, Demarius' mother, because it is her words that can best describe to you the impact of what it was like for her to learn about SPD's actions and how it felt for her to see that the Seattle police officers were mocking the death of her son, of her loved one. And when I heard about the mock tombstone, I too was deeply disturbed. I was disturbed by the disrespect it showed to the Butts family, who I've had the opportunity and great privilege to get to know very well through my representation. And I was disturbed about what it represents to the community, larger community beyond Mr. Butts' family. I was disturbed that it was allowed to happen at all. And I was disturbed that it apparently continued for weeks and or months. And this hurts Ms. Butts, it hurts Demarius' mother, it hurts their whole family, and it erodes trust with the community. As you know, the memorial that was in the police department was supposed to remember him. It was supposed to remember his life and that he mattered. And taking that from wherever it was found and placing it in the East Precinct shows a deep level of disrespect to him, to his family, and to the community. So I want to ask you basically two categories of questions. And the first category is about factual questions, and the second category is about cultural questions. And so the first category brings me questions about sort of how this awful incident was allowed to happen. I want to know who took the memorial to Demarius. I want to know where it was taken from and who brought it to the East Precinct, who displayed it. I want to know how long it was there. I want to know how many officers saw it and did not say anything, did not speak up. I want to know if officers did speak up and who spoke up and if anyone said it was wrong. I want to know when it was removed. I have questions about who was in charge in 2021 of the East Precinct, who was the highest person in command. And I have questions about whether anyone was held accountable, particularly whether there was any accountability prior to when this event became public. And ultimately, I want to know what your opinion is. Was this wrong? Was it ethically wrong? Was it wrong for police officers to do this? Did it violate Seattle police policy? And my second category of question is it just about police culture? Is this display acceptable as a part of Seattle police culture? And assuming that it's not, I want to know what you, as the now police chief, and I understand you were not the police chief then, but as you are now, I want to know what you will do to ensure that nothing like this ever happens again inside of Seattle Police Department. So I'm appreciative of your time and hope that you can answer some of my questions, and also hope that you can hear from Ms. Butts this morning.
Yeah, no, and thank you. And I think that's right now, as I mentioned, we're working with the OPA to answer, I think, the first set of questions that you had, because I think we don't have necessarily the answers for that, like who displayed it, where was it acquired from, why was it acquired from, how you know, who saw it. I do know, to answer one of the questions, Captain Sano, Eric Sano was the captain of the East Precinct at that time. And so that is the one thing that I can note. But as far as some of the other details, as far as officers who saw it, who displayed it, who put it up, those are stuff that I think the OPA will hopefully be able to kind of unwind and be able to articulate what happened. One of the challenges that, as I kind of mentioned, is that we had a significant amount of officers that left the department, many officers from the East Precinct specifically, and so there was still unknown if some of those officers that left the department were a part of that. But we want to make sure that we do everything we can to work with OPA and getting those details. The second line of questioning, just in regards to culture change, is really, I think for us, it's about like there was a huge level of wellness issues that we were facing, not only for the stress in the community, but also stress of the officers, just experiencing a variety of different things, from violent crime rising up, officers leaving, having to take extra workloads, working, a variety of different things. And so it's really an investment into doing outward and growth mindsets with our officers to really focus on how to think about problem solving, how to really focus on wellness, because a healthy officer will bring healthy outcomes. And so really over the last couple of years has been this huge investments into trying to make sure that we are doing a lot of stuff into creating a healthy officer for all that they ever exposed to. One of the things that we launched in 2022, which we've had a lot of community members involved and engaged with, is our SPD Before the Badge, where we bring officers in 6 weeks prior to the academy. We infuse them in social emotional learning, brain development. We give them the growth and outward mindset. We infuse them in understanding communities of color. So we actually have them in listening sessions and discussion sessions with communities that have been impacted by levels of violence, people that have been formerly incarcerated, our LGBT community, our African American community. And it's to really give people an exposure to all of the issues that they're going to be working with in the city. And so it's the first of its kind in the country. And it was really important for me to, we talk about, training people to be guardians and not warriors. But if we don't actually develop their skill set to learn and build relationships with community, it's really just not the same thing. And so for me, it was taking officers very early on in their career and giving these investments in it. And then we've a variety of things. As you build culture, you're trying to figure out how do you build a level of positivity in the structure of our department. How do you give people how do you invest in them? What are you doing to spend time to make sure that, because we're working a lot of overtime to try and supplement just, our basic levels of shifts, but that'll burn them out. And if you burn them out, we find ourselves like they're going to end up being short with community members. They're going to end up finding themselves in different issues that could cause problems. And so that's really trying to figure out how do we invest in that, but also giving them a whole new exposure to community. So even with that, some of our advisory councils, we've had a lot more officer participation in those councils. They're engaging community a lot more because our big push is really about everything we do is about building relationships. And it's still going to take time. Right now, we've had over 100 people that have been trained in SPD Before the Badge, but we're actually taking elements of those classes that are of the 6 weeks classes, and we're actually infusing it into in-service training as well for all of our officers. And then the next iteration of what we're going to be doing as part of our SPD Before the Badge is building a mentorship program with community members for our lieutenants and captains as part of our Management Development Institute. It's important that it's not just me that knows community or Cookie that knows community. It's, Oscar, some of our other people in our department that know community. It's important that all of our department knows community. And it's really changing the culture of making everybody a generalist rather than a specialist. And that is going to take, some time to be able to develop and do, but that is really kind of setting the culture for the department as we move forward.
Thank you, Chief Diaz. It is 9:22, and I just want to, again, thank you for being here, but time unfortunately is short. This is a conversation that deserves a lot more time than just our 30 minutes today, but with the time we do have today, I want to make sure we can get to folks that want to ask questions. I certainly have some questions, but before I see if other commissioners have questions, I want to just check in with Commissioner Levitt, see if Demarius Butts' mother wishes to speak at this time.
Thank you very much. And I do believe that Ms. Butts would like to speak at this time. Thank you.
Yes. Okay. Can you guys hear me?
Yes,
Yeah.
we can hear you.
Okay. Well, my name is Stephanie. I'm the mother of Demarius Butts. My son was a loving son, brother, and father, and much more. Every day we miss him. Our family hasn't been the same since that day. He was my first child. He was my first child, and he was the first grandchild to my parents. Demarius was killed on April 20th, 2017 by Seattle Police Department. The day that I lost my son was the worst day of my life. When I first heard the SPD displayed a fake tombstone with my son's name on it, I was shocked. I cannot explain the pain and the anger that I felt. It was very hurtful to know that SPD joked about killing my son, that SPD officers was so callous that they warmed up food in a microwave below my son's fake tombstone and didn't see anything wrong with that. And the SPD leadership allowed the tombstone to be displayed in a common area for a prolonged period of time. I've also been to many Black Lives Matter memorials, remembering and honoring people killed by the police like my son was. Those memorials have been very important to me and my family. They made us feel like my son's life mattered to more than just my family. When I learned that the tombstone displayed at the precinct was likely taken from a Black Lives Memorial, I was even more hurt and upset. I was also shocked by the lack of compassion and humanity displayed by the officers. I do not understand this. I don't understand it at all. I do not understand why someone from SPD took a tombstone with my son's name on it and displayed it inside of the East Precinct. I do not understand why this tombstone was allowed to stay there for such a long time. I want to know why this happened. I want to know why it was allowed to continue. I want to know if anyone has been held accountable. I want to know what is being done so it never happens again. I want to know why killing my son and getting away with it wasn't enough. I want answers, and so far I haven't heard any.
Thank you. I don't want to, I'm assuming that was the end, but I wanted to be able to say, I don't want this ever to be displayed. I also want, those answers. That is the reason why we're working with the Office of Police Accountability to get those answers, to see who needs to be held accountable for the display of that. I think hopefully that will be able to make sure that we don't ever have this happen again.
Thank you, Chief Diaz. And thank you, Ms. Butts, for being here today and for speaking with us. We really appreciate it. And I'm so sorry for everything you and your family are going through. We have about 14 minutes left. I have a number of questions. Chief Diaz, as you've heard, Demarius Butts, he was entitled to dignity, and his family was entitled to dignity. And as Commissioner Levitt mentioned, it's difficult to capture how insulting and degrading that display was. I have a number of questions, but I do want to acknowledge my fellow commissioners who may also have questions first. So at this time, I'll go ahead and open it up and see if any other commissioners have some questions at this time.
Well, I'll go ahead and ask my question. Chief Diaz, I was absolutely furious when I saw this video. And I don't understand how those who are charged to be public servants could allow such disrespect and hostility to be in the work environment. And I just want to know, how do you plan, or the department plan to support those who endured such harm in seeing the tombstone and the Trump banner, which is a sign of white supremacy? How do you plan to um, help those officers who see that, the tombstone, the sign over and over again? What do you plan to do to assist those officers? And you mentioned Detective Cookie, who has a lawsuit against SPD, alleging racism and sexism. And what this video does for me is say that, yes, SPD is a hostile work environment. And I've heard what you've said, and I know that the Beyond the Badge program is very important to you. But more needs to be done, it seems to me, to change the culture of SPD immediately.
No, and I think that's, what we've been working towards. I mean, as I know, we've actually put just in 20, really coming into 21, 22, we did also active bystander training, try to make sure that officers are noting when they see issues and bringing them to the attention of their commanders. Majority of our complaints are actually internal complaints. We've seen a massive reduction in OPA complaints, but still, majority of them are actually complaints that are actually resonated internally, and which I'm glad to see officers actually, when they see something, they're actually able to identify things right away for us to be able to address. To that level of culture, it is something that, while I've had to make not just a little bit of terminations, I have to make a lot of terminations in this because of people's actions. Those actions are dictating that. And I try to make sure that, as I do that, that it sets a level of establishment within the department to say, look, certain activities are not going to be tolerated. And, I think, since then, I can tell you, I know I've had to make a lot more discipline than probably other chiefs combined. And I think really it's trying to set that tone for the entire department to make sure that, there is levels of accountability that we have to make sure that we're doing. And, for this action in 2021, I think that's what we want. We want answers. We want to figure out, what the circumstances are to make sure that we hold people accountable in that. But as we move forward, we're constantly right now seeing some of the steps that we've taken already, seeing those reductions in people using force, seeing those reductions in complaints, seeing those reductions and sometimes bad encounters. And but we still have, obviously I still want to make sure that we have still a long road ahead. But I believe just in some of the work that we're doing is really create that foundation for really a robust level of change. And I know I've worked with Detective Cookie for many, many years surrounding her. I was her supervisor. We still continue to have good discussions and relationships. And, I want to make sure that every one of our officers has that ability to be that robust community engagement like her, as well as being able to do all the other types of work that we require of our officers as well.
Thank you, Chief Diaz. Are there any other commissioners that have a question at this time?
I have one question. I'd like to know, do you know about how often the supervisor went to that area? I mean, since it might not be an area that, in your estimation, I mean, would you know about how many times the supervisor might go to that particular area in East Precinct?
Reverend Walden, that's a good question. I don't know just quite yet how many supervisors came in and around that area. And I'm hoping that we can get to that, some of those answers of that, but right now I just don't have that exact number. It's a separate area from our roll call room and from our sergeant areas, so I just don't know how much, if it's on a daily basis or if it's on a weekly basis. But I think that's some of the answers that we hope to get to.
Another question too is that, did you do this investigation when you polled the black officers to see how many times that they were down there and how that felt to them, and also possibility of learning more about the ones who used to come to this, come in with the mega hats on during the chop and those kinds of things. So I think this is a good opportunity to explore the deep racism that's been embedded in the Seattle Police Department for over a generation. And all of the black officers who retired endured, but they stuck it out. They endured a lot of a lot of racism, and I mean, mothers personally have talked to, stepping away from the chair. Mothers personally have talked to many officers who did not go forward with their complaint, but they wanted a place to absolutely lodge it and at least talk about it. So this is an opportunity to really give officers, non non-white officers some support they need, since they've chosen to want to be a police officer and to make a difference not only in the black community but in other communities in Seattle. I think that those officers need to have, so I mean, wellness too. I mean, wellness from racism within inside the department. I think it's a good opportunity to be able to expand this program before the badge, but something similar to deal with the officers, and they might need some focus groups themselves, these officers. Some of those officers have been on the force for 30 years, but they've endured. And so this is an opportunity to move forward in making sure that the black officers, I'm speaking specifically for the African American officers right now and other officers who also want wellness when they come to work. Thank you, Chief.
No, and I can't agree with you more. I mean, I exactly to that point. That's one of the things that we're working with OIG to do, that equity assessment, to discuss this, potential discrimination or bias issues internally, and how do we better create an environment for all of our personnel. So that is, one of the things that we, have been already in discussions, because we want to make sure that it's healthy for all of our officers of color and all of our officers in general. So.
Commissioner Raven Tyler, I think your hand is up.
Yes, I just had a question regarding, like, how are you measuring the shifts in culture within the department? I know you mentioned that there's different programs and that there's been a decrease in OPA and all these things, but it seems to me that maybe that's not given an adequate or an accurate picture of what the culture is like inside of the department. Like, integrity is doing the right thing even when no one's looking. And it seems to me, if this occurred, that there's a lack of integrity inside of the department. And so I'm curious, how are you measuring culture shifts? It's a little hard to answer. And, like, how are you planning to continue to create a culture shift within the department, not just with the department and the community, but internally? I think everyone hit a really good point of, like, I couldn't even imagine walking into a room like that as a Black woman and just not even knowing what to do and not feeling safe enough to come forward, or that my voice will be heard. Clear indicator that internal culture is just not where it's supposed to be.
Yeah, so I know CO Maxi is also on the call, and that's one of the things that we are trying to figure out, ways to measure culture change and shift. And I think even with, it's very easy, because you sometimes find yourself, changing policy, developing training and thinking that is what's going to change culture. And that's one component of it, but it doesn't create the necessary, all the environments that you need. And so we are finding different ways to actually assess and measure culture, using of different metrics to be able to do that. And I think, some of the metrics that, are very easy for us to look at is complaints, use of force, also early intervention systems that allow us to be able to identify when officers are starting to go down a path where they are exhibiting signs that, either the stress is getting to them or they're exhibiting signs that they shouldn't be exhibiting. And I think that's what we're, constantly trying to evaluate. CO Maxi, is there anything that we're able to highlight in some of the culture measurements?
A couple things. One is specifically on the Before the Badge program. We have both Seattle University and New York University engaged in research studies to see whether it's effective, and if it is, what opportunities we have to expand and make it more effective. And as the chief mentioned earlier, we've recently retooled the relational policing innovation team to bring greater focus and attention to driving that philosophical perspective into all of the department and spread it far and wide. I think, as the chief properly noted, changing culture, while incredibly important, takes time and dedication, and it is a whole lot of very small steps. And we are not, as the chief just said, we're not naive in thinking that changing policy and training is going to immediately affect culture. And I think the approach of the Before the Badge, getting the new recruits as they come in, will start to help infuse that, and the new team will help figure out other strategies on how to drive that relational policing. Just lastly, and then I'll turn it back to questions, because I know we're pressed for time. One of the things that we are very focused on is figuring out how to use the robust data systems we have to understand what bias looks like in the department. I understand for most of you, looking at data is probably the wrong approach to understanding bias and culture, and that's not all we're doing. But in terms of the measurement, which I think is the question, we look at our data and we are trying to control all known variables, and we have a lot of them, in order to allow, for example, race to be the only independent variable, so that we can actually get a narrow focus on what could be problematic behavior. We're the first department to do this, and a lot of this is still an experimental design, but that's what we're driving towards, because we know there are concerns out there, we feel them internally, we grapple with them, and we are trying to figure out how to measure and know when we're successful with that culture change.
Thank you, CEO Maxey and Chief Diaz. It is 9:40, but with your permission, if I could ask a question as a co-chair.
Yes.
So Chief Diaz, I'm glad that you and CEO Maxey brought up the concept of culture and policy, because that's what I'd like to ask about. In looking at the SPD policy manual, I couldn't find anything that was specifically on point with putting up a display like this, or officers' conduct in a SPD facility like this. There was some general policy on professionalism, but I wanted to ask you about policy and about culture and what you're doing as the chief. And as we know, and the reason I bring up policy is because sometimes policy isn't sufficient. As we all saw in the Charlene Lyles incident and the Charlene Lyles inquest, the jury found that the shooting was within policy, which raises questions about whether the policy was right. And so my first question is, do you think the SPD policy related to a situation like this is sufficient to deter this type of conduct and hold people accountable who engage in it? That's my first question. And then my second question is, under your leadership as the chief, what are you doing to communicate to your department that this type of culture is unacceptable, and what your expectations of patrol officers and command staff are if they encounter a display like this? Thank you.
Yeah. So let me start off with number two. Number one, in the second one, we've went through every bureau chief to explain to them they're the ones that are going to be held. They need to be held accountable. Their supervisors need to be held accountable. So we need to make sure that number one, there's no displays of stuff that are in there that is, going to create trauma and harm, that we are constantly making sure. And the struggle is sometimes that a policy manual will not be able to cover every aspect of what we experience in it. So we do write the policies in sometimes very generalities. So when you look at 5.001 on professionalism, it kind of has this, a little bit of catch-all, and it allows us to be able to capture some of those different changes. Plus, there's also rules around city facilities when it comes to displays of items and stuff. So it's not just necessarily your SPD policy that also could be as part of that, but it could be just in general other policies that regulate city government facilities as well. But for my staff, it's really making sure that there is constant accountability all the way across down the chain of command. It's easy for sorry to say, well, maybe not my responsibility, but if the lieutenant's going to hold them accountable, it will be their responsibility. And one of the things that before my time, we never saw different supervisors sometimes be held accountable for actions. It was always the line officer that ends up getting held accountable, and that has actually been different in my tenure. I've actually had different sergeants, lieutenants, and different ranks where I've held people accountable, and that right there is a shift in just the change in leadership that has happened over my 26 years in the department. And that is really just trying to make sure that the whole department is really focused on just really good policing and, working with community. And I think that's really what our goal is to do, that we want to be part of the community. We want to be engaged. And, I would, when you have a case like this where, 2.5 years ago, it is it is just an unacceptable time to even have that levels of display. And I think right now we're trying to make sure that doesn't have that continued level 2.5 years later, that we're moving this department forward in the right direction. And I think we're getting some small wins, but we still have a long way to go still.
Thank you. I see Brian Maxey, you have your hand up. We are over time, but go ahead briefly.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity. We do not think that SPD policy is clear on this or helpful in giving guidance as to what's appropriate in the workplace. We also have found that city policies themselves are similarly deficient. Chief has asked that I look deeply into how do we frame this in policy at SPD, and we'll just take the lead for the city at making it clear what's acceptable and what's not acceptable. Clearly, this was not. And as the chief said, the officers that we've talked to have really expressed their embarrassment over this display. I also am happy to report that while people are still reporting out to me, I don't have the full picture, but as the chief immediately ordered for another department-wide check on the appropriateness of the workplaces and ensuring there are no images that would create a hostile work environment. So far, no one has reported any similar findings in the department today. We are going to continue to look. We will remain vigilant, but the initial look in 2023, we're not finding similar pockets of problematic materials. Thank you.
And we did that, similarly about 6 months ago as well. So we're trying to make sure that we're running, routine checks on this as well. So it's not just something that came because of this video. It was actually something that we've been doing previously.
Thank you, Chief Diaz, and thank you, CEO Maxey, for being here on such short notice. I also want to just really thank Ms. Butts for being here and sharing her thoughts with us today as well. This is the beginning of the conversation. This is a conversation that deserves a lot more time than we have this morning. So we look forward to continuing the conversation. The CPC will absolutely be working on policy recommendations, and we look forward to continuing the conversation. And I want to thank everyone for engaging in the conversation today. But at this time, we do need to move into executive session, and so I will just state for now that the commission will be going into executive session.
Oh, no, we need to do some business.
We need to do some business first. Thank you, Kim. But as we take care of that business and then go into executive session, just thank you, Chief Diaz and CFO Maxey and Ms. Futz for being here. Thank you. And
Great, thank you to the co-chairs. Just want to, before we go into executive session, to review what we are going to be doing today during executive session. I also have a request that I would like the CPC to make a decision prior to going into executive session. So I just want to review the schedule for today. We will be interviewing in executive session with the members of the commission, 3 finalists for the executive director position. And then later this afternoon, as the CPC agreed, the finalists will be meeting with 2 groups of stakeholders. First is accountability partners. Confirmed in that meeting are Andrew Meyerberg with the mayor's office, Director Betts with the OPA office, Geneva Taylor with OPA, Newell Aldrich with Councilmember Herbolt's office, Lisa Judge, who is the Inspector General, and Alyssa Piers Morrison, who is with her office. We'll be meeting with the candidates. And then we will be meeting with the staff, the CPC staff. The CPC staff has confirmed their attendance. So I expect that the full staff will be there. I will be providing a written briefing to the commission of those 2 staff meetings prior to your decision to make a nomination on August 2nd. One of the things that we have asked as part of the interview process is for the candidates to respond to 2 questions in a written format. You should have received those from me yesterday. One of the things I'm going to ask you to do is to enter it into your record, and actually would like to kind of post it on the CPC website immediately. I'm going to kind of get to kind of what the specific asks I'm going to ask you to vote on kind of at the end here. But we did receive those. We will be so kind of the logistics for the interview is hopefully if we start at 10, we'll have 30 minutes with each candidate. If we're a little bit late in starting, I'll make sure that each candidate has an equal amount of time. We have 5 standard questions. I'll be asking the candidates the standard questions just so that kind of facilitate it, make sure that folks hear the question. They've also received the written questions in advance. It was originally 30 minutes to the original time, so all the candidates will receive them kind of in equal time to prepare for those questions. Hopefully we'll leave about 5 minutes at the end of that interview for folks to, for the finalists to use at their discretion. We'll be speaking first with Arameet Glass, then with Ashley Gordon-Hanks, and then finally with Kali Ellis. I have 2 asks of the commission. The first is that we post the written questions on the CPC website so that the public has access to those questions. And then the second is that we also engage the public and stakeholders through a survey process. So we have a standard survey that we use in conjunction with searches. We used it with OPA. And I would like the discretion to set up that survey and then post that link no later than Friday for the public, and that survey would run until the end of the month for the public to have some additional input into the candidates' questions. Before I kind of turn it over for that vote, I am going to recognize the city attorney's office just to provide some guidance in regards to kind of what needs to happen between this meeting and our meeting on August 2nd.
Thanks for the introduction. I think that that advice can actually be provided during the exec session. So we will be participating in the exec session, and we will cover that at that time.
Okay. One of the things I do want to advise the commissioners regarding records, any records that you keep during the interview are public records. They should be treated as all records that you create as part of your role as a commissioner. So with that, I'm going to ask Joel if you could move to place the written responses on the CPC website and also to direct me to create a survey, a standard survey that would be open between Friday and the end of the month.
So based on Pam's presentation, at this time, I will entertain a motion to do exactly what Pam suggested, which is to post the written responses from the candidates on the website. And I'll take it as one motion if it's so moved to direct Pam to engage the community in a survey on the candidates that would be open through the end of the month. Is there such a motion?
I'll step away from the chair and move that we have that we post the written questions and we engage the community in a survey.
It's been so moved. Is there a second?
Second.
There's a second. And there's a second. Great. Is there any discussion, questions? Oh, okay, seeing none, we'll just move straight into the vote. All in favor of posting the questions and the written responses from the candidates to the website and engaging the public in a survey through the end of the month, please say aye.
Aye.
All
Aye.
all opposed, nay? I see no opposed. The motion passes, and so that will be an additional element of the process we are engaging in for our executive director search.
Great.
So
And
with-
for
go ahead.
the record, I'll let you know that I will be providing a written summary of those survey results prior to the August 2nd.
Great.
meeting.
So is there anything else we need to cover before going into executive session? Okay. Well, with that, the commission will now be going into executive session to evaluate the qualifications of applicants for public employment pursuant to RCW 42.30.110 subsection 1G, and to discuss with legal counsel representing the agency litigation or potential litigation related to proposed action or current practice pursuant to RCW 42.30.110 sub 1I. It is expected that the commission will be in executive session until approximately, we're a little late right now, so I would say until 11:45. 11:45 is when we expect to be in executive session, and we will not be coming back into regular session after executive session ends. I think that covers it. And then with that, we'll go ahead and direct the staff to bring us into executive session.
And I think they all have been part of the open session, so they can heard kind of the
Great.
Where do you reckon? I should probably move, I'm assuming.
You're good.
You're fine.
You're good.